The process for 2036 started some time ago, and it's always been building to that process where we need to report back to the community how we were progressing. And I think some of the things that Christine has mentioned there talk a little bit about just that process. We estimated that during that process, the mayor at the time was Alan Smith, and he was very supportive of that process, and Mr. Watkins drove a lot of the operational side of that. We estimated that 8,000 people out of our population were touched in some way, shape or form by whether it was a workshop, whether it was a presentation, whether it was via the website. And that's an incredible amount of community consultation. And I think it's very easy to say that there is no other process that I've seen in Dubbo City Council, and probably it's hard to think of another process in any local government area where you've had that many people, that percentage of the population that have been involved and engaged in a process. So what was really important to go through, and exactly as Christine talked about, potential cynicism or potential lip service that people thought might have been occurring with some process, some community consultation process, it was very important to let the community know that the modern way of council in general, but specifically with Dubbo City Council, was that this was no longer going to be Dubbo City Council driving the city. It was going to be the community driving the city forward. And the community strategic plan was obviously that tool that we were going to use. 2036 had a nice ring to it, but it was also logical. When the process started in 2011, it was a generation, a 25-year time frame. So really getting people to think about what the city was going to look like in a 25-year time frame was quite difficult, because it's hard to think that far in the future. And I know when I thought about it, I started thinking about that about 25 years ago. And things like we just constructed our first roundabout 25 years ago. We've got a couple of roundabouts in Dubbo now. So things like that, where you start to think about the changes that have happened in the last 25 years, and then try to imagine the next 25 years, which is obviously quite difficult to do. So that community consultation was fantastic. And the role of a councillor, and the role certainly of council, is changing in this process. Because no longer was it up to councillors and council to drive the ideas and to come up with the ideas. The role of council is really now to try and work out how we can deliver what the community has asked for. And there was potential there the community would ask for ridiculous things. The potential they might have asked for a 50,000 seat football stadium, or they might have asked for an opera house. But the community was actually incredibly sensible and incredibly logical, and asked for things that they knew there was a chance that might be able to be delivered. Some things were relatively easy that they asked for. Some things were certainly longer term. But it was important to let the community know that we had certain aspirations, but we wanted to hear what their aspirations were. And then our role, especially from a council perspective, is how do we resource these various projects? How do we make sure that we've got the correct prioritisation? So in that whole process, part of it, I think it's very important, is today. Because it's all well and good to have a plan, but you've got to measure what you treasure. And if we say, here's our community strategic plan for 2036, and we wait until 2036 until we look at it, then we might have hit the mark, we might have hit some of our goals early, or we might have completely missed the mark. But it's too late then in 2036 to make some changes. So it's incredibly important to sit there every year and look at a report card to say, how have we gone over the previous year, and what things are we aiming towards? So hopefully, in 25 iterations, we will get to the point where 2036 arrives, and we've ticked off all of those things, and hopefully some of those well and truly ahead of schedule. So in terms of that plan, we gathered data. It's all well and good to say, how are we going? I could stand here and say, oh yeah, we're going pretty good, thanks, and that's the end of it. But we want some cold, hard data to actually back up whether or not we're delivering on that plan. So we relied on a whole range of pieces of information. We rely on the ABS for certain data. We rely on the community needs survey that we do. We rely on tourism information, tourism data. We rely on some of our own data that we collect. And we gather all that data together. And again, involving the champions. I'm not sure if Christine realised how many things she'd signed up for, and all the champions, how many things they'd signed up for when they first became champions, but it's a 25-year contract, so hopefully they're aware of that. But in that process, we took a range of community performance indicators to the champions, and we said, here are all the components that we looked at in the process. Now, we could present a list to you that's probably got 60 or 70 components to it. But in that, we wanted to pick out the ones that the champions felt were the most important ones from the community perspective. And it was important that someone external had a look at that, because when we're in council and when we are involved in council activities every day, it sometimes is quite easy to get a little bit lost in just council things, looking very much internally. So we wanted people from the outside. So we had a good workshop. We went through and picked out a range of items that we thought, in consultation with the champions, that we thought the community was interested in. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So enough of the setup for it. Let's actually have a look at some of the data that we've gotten out of the champions. And again, this isn't data to make Dubbo look good or look bad. These are the components that the champions chose as important. And whether they're good, bad or indifferent, they're presented as they are. And we will take them on board and we'll work on ones that we need to improve and we'll keep consolidating the ones that are good. So I've got a range of components of data there that I'll present to you, and then there will be documentation afterwards that you can look at, and of course there'll be a website and there'll be information in the media that you'll be able to go through and have a look at the report card and give us your feedback about how we're going. So the first data that I look at would be educational facilities. 90.5% of our community felt that the educational facilities offered in Dubbo were appropriate and were good enough for them to be able to live their life and educate their children in Dubbo. And that's important to know that, to me that's a good figure, but it's important to know that our greatest export in years gone by has been our talent, our students. They'll either go off to boarding school or go off to university. But the growth at Charles Sturt University, for example, has been 7% over the last year. So that 90.5% satisfaction level says to me that we're keeping our students in Dubbo longer and we're able to retain some of that talent in Dubbo rather than exporting all that talent. And typically once they go to Sydney, then we tend to lose them forever, which is a shame. The second component is satisfaction with sporting facilities, or people that believe we've got first-class sporting facilities. And that's 50.5%, which I actually personally found a bit low. So it's not about what I think, and that's the great thing. This is data from the community. The community, only half of the community thinks we've got first-class sporting facilities. That's increased from a year ago when it was only 41%. So what we've got to do with that is look at how we can improve those sporting facilities. And as a simple example, we look at Barton Park. The investment we've got in Barton Park, $5.7 million we're putting into Barton Park as a combination of federal, state and local government money. But that's one of those things to try and address one of the things that the community has said is a shortfall in what they believe. So we've then got to look at other ways that we can keep improving our sporting facilities because we want that figure to be higher than 50%. The next one is 90% who believe we're delivering on community and social requirements. And again, in terms of what we've got in our population and the ageing population we've got to make sure we're addressing some of the social needs and the community needs that people have got. So again, that's an area that people, I think, are saying that we're doing quite well in. The next one is quite interesting. 62.75% feel that our medical facilities in Dubbo are adequate. Now, obviously, there's room for improvement there. And this is one of the very important components of our community strategic plan and the State of the City report. Everyone knows that local government does not control the medical processes. We don't control the hospital, we don't contribute money to the hospital or local doctors. There's combinations of state and federal money. But the community doesn't care, and the community strategic plan doesn't care, and as a council, we've got to work out ways to try and deliver what the community wants. So the 62.75 is low, in my opinion, so we've got to work out ways that we've got to lobby state government, lobby federal government, work out ways that we can actively take a role in something that is outside our area of control. But again, that's what the community strategic plan is all about. It's about making sure we deliver for the community, not just controlling what council can control. The next one is satisfaction with council services. 70.81% is the figure there. Now that's a figure that again leaves us some room for growth, but as a council, sometimes council is the easiest one to pick on, so I think 70.81% is a reasonable figure for satisfaction level with council. When we get to so they're mostly, those figures there are driven mostly by the community needs survey. Let's look at some data that's just straight data, recorded data. When we look at visitation, and we look at the visitation economy in Dubbo, it's worth so much to our economy. We've got the wonderful zoo in Dubbo, obviously, that drives so much of that visitation, but driving external money into our economy is incredibly important. So we had 422,000 overnight visitors in Dubbo last year, which was growth. Excuse me, it's small writing on my glasses on, up 12%. So that's growth of 12% over the previous year. Again, that's something that we recognise is a good number, but we can keep improving that. And what other tourism facilities can we keep encouraging? Because they might come here to see the zoo and they might leave the next day. So we get 422,000 overnight visitors, but can we keep them here for 2 nights or 3 nights or 4 nights? What can council do? Again, we're not going to open up tourism operations, but what can we do to make it easy for tourism operators to work in Dubbo? How can we encourage more tourism? Because if we could keep them in Dubbo for 2 or 3 or 4 days, then we're increasing our economy dramatically, and they're people that are already coming here every day. The next one, 419,000, which is a growth of 6.31%, are the day visitors. And again, that's a good example. What else can we do in Dubbo to increase the day visitors from just being day visitors to want to stay overnight or stay on multiple nights? So there are areas there that are cold hard numbers. There are increases in terms of those numbers, but in terms of those increases, how can we increase them further? How can we keep growing those areas of the economy, essentially? So they're, to me, in my mind, very important pieces of data. The next one is investment in Dubbo. Our investment in Dubbo last year for approved DAs through council was $179.9 million. Now that's a growth of 112%. Sometimes those figures can be slightly skewed by 1 or 2 large projects, and we did have some large projects that had DAs approved for them last year. But again, that shows people want to invest in Dubbo. There's confidence in Dubbo. There's people who see that Dubbo is a good place to invest. And we constantly see Dubbo rated in the top 3 in the state, sometimes the top 10 in the country as a place to invest, because there's good diversity in what we have in our economy, and it's not relying on just one component of one industry, one vertical industry. The fact that we've got our major employer being retail, 14.4% of our employees in retail, shows that we are an industry, or we are an economy that actually has a whole range of different components feeding into it, because retail is driven by other parts of the economy. So again, that's a great number. That's good growth from the previous year. The challenge is, how do we keep that growth up, and how do we keep showing that Dubbo is a great place to invest? The last one from just a straight people perspective is about the growth in Dubbo, the population growth. How many people do we get to Dubbo? How many people do we attract to Dubbo? So last year, through our promotional activities, and that's a combination of Evo Cities and our own promotional team and a range of activities that we undertake, we had 185 new residents come to Dubbo as a direct result. So we know that Dubbo grew by more than that. Dubbo's population at the moment is 40,882. So we grew by about 1% over the previous year. Obviously, there's more people moving to Dubbo than just through our marketing activities, but I think that figure of 185 is important to show that we are out there, we're promoting Dubbo, we're doing things within Dubbo to make Dubbo an attractive place. And if you think of the recent promotion that we had as a combination with our zoo, with training, with 2UE, where we brought 5 families to Dubbo with that combination, they're the sort of activities that start to show off Dubbo. So all of those people would have gone back to Sydney and said what a wonderful place we had, what a wonderful zoo we had, and probably discovered that we didn't have dirt down the main street of Dubbo, and electricity and telephones. So exposing Dubbo to a range of people from outside of Dubbo, I think is very important, and that's certainly what our own internal marketing teams aim to do. When we start to look at the environment, and we start to look at how we manage the environment, again, it's wonderful to have a city that's growing, the economy is going strong, but we need to make sure that we're working on our environment as well. So, for example, we planted 8 hectares of native vegetation last year. That's an increase of 60%. Now, to me, again, that's a very impressive increase, and that's a lot of native vegetation to go through and plant throughout. We've only got a relatively small LGA, 3,425 square kilometres. So it's a lot of native vegetation to plant in that overall LGA, and a lot for our staff to do. But again, it wasn't our staff that did all that. Through a range of community activities, community tree plantings, and it just shows how engaged our community is to basically try and make our city a better place. When we look at some things involving waste, we've got things like 56,000 tonnes of waste for landfill at our waste depot, and that was up 22%. So again, in the economy that we're working in at the moment, in the environment, that's something that we can aim for. We can try and decrease the amount of landfill that we have, because although we've got a great resource in Landfill Depot, we've got hundreds, even thousands of years of space available there for our landfill, we still want to try and look after the environment by trying to take less to landfill. So contrasting with that figure is that we diverted 7,600 tonnes from landfill through a recycling process. So that figure was up 10%. So again, from a council perspective, how can we encourage more people to use recycling and less of their waste to go into landfill? And it is a throwaway society we live in, so we are battling a little bit. And again, some of those things are outside council's control, but we've got to look at ways, because again, these are things that the community has told us are important, things the community has told us that they want to try and improve. The water usage that we had last year, an average of 425 kilolitres per person, per household, per household. Now again, that was a figure up 71%. Now it might be easy to dismiss that as being what happens in the weather. we get a hot season, about 35% of our water is used on gardening. So if you get a hot season, people water their gardens more. But again, we take initiatives and we do work on initiatives to try and work out ways to reduce the amount of water that people use, whether that be through Sustainability Expo, like we've got coming up next month, to try and educate people, or whether we do things like have shower heads, low flow shower heads, to try and encourage people to use less water. Again, it's not something that council can control. We might control it by pricing, but it's not something we can control directly. But what we try and do is try and encourage and educate our community, because again, the community strategic plan says that this is important. The last one is power usage, and even though we have a fantastic example of what we do in Dubbo, we're the #1 solar connector by penetration in the latest figures that we have. Over 30% of our residents on their houses have PV cells, and community, the council can be a leader in that as well. But we've got things like a 70 kilowatt utility at the cultural centre. We've got solar panels on a number of our buildings. In fact, we were a leader in that when we connected at the library solar panels there and put up the meter to show some of the power that was being generated there. So we can lead the way. We're not going to go and connect PV cells on everyone's roof. But I think the community has said this is important to them, and so what they've done is they've taken from the leadership from council and they've looked at that and started to connect those solar panels for a range of reasons, but I think that community leadership council showed was certainly a major part of that. In terms of our power usage, we used 16,000 kilowatt hours last year. Again, that was an increase of 6%. And that's something that we can work on to be a leader in the community again. We look at things like LED downlights, we look at things like LED fluoro lights, low power usage. What can we do to conserve power throughout our organisation to show that leadership? So the fact that we increased it by 6%, there's other areas there that we can try and work on to keep delivering power savings there. So they're some of the individual statistics that I think are important to give that snapshot, to give that report card. And I think they're important, and I don't want to make it too stats heavy, but I think they're important. If your daughter or son came home from school and said, here's my report card, and you looked at it and said, Johnny's going well at school this year, well, it probably wouldn't be good enough. You'd want some data, some stats around that. And so that's what we've very much tried to do, to put some data and some stats around that. There's just a couple of stats that I'd like to finish off on. One of them was within the councillors themselves. One of the figures that we had from our last community needs survey, that was done several years ago, was the dissatisfaction level with councillors was very high. It set up around the 26, might have been high, the 28% mark. So it was a very high dissatisfaction level with councillors, and the community spoke very loudly and said they wanted unity from their leaders, and they wanted to see the team working together rather than a fractured bunch of councillors, and hence that reflected poorly on council overall, because they saw that that was how council was. Even though the two are slightly separate, they still saw that in that leadership base. The last community needs survey with the current group of councillors we had only had a 6% dissatisfaction level with councillors, which is not too bad in a political arena. There's always going to be some people unhappy with some decision the council makes. So to get that level, I think that reflects very well on what people think of the current group of councillors, and also by virtue of that, the current council. So they feel that council is doing a good job overall, which probably reflects in the fact that 96.75% of people say, when they're asked in a community needs survey, do they have pride in their city, they say yes. And I think that's great. And I think we see that pride in our city in so many different things that we do, and in so many different aspects. I talked about volunteering before. We have a 2% higher volunteering rate than the state average. And I think part of that is because we do have that community engagement. We do have people who are interested in our community, and we have people, fantastically, who have that pride in our city. And it's not just pride in their city that they talk to their mates at the pub about. When someone asks them in a survey that their name is never recorded against, still 96.75% of people say that they've got pride in our city. And that's the sort of city, in my opinion, that I want to be part of. I want to be part of a city where people do have pride in the city, and we do have that sort of real community engagement, and we see people who are really engaged in the community. The other one, which is interesting, is the crime statistics. And we talk about at the moment some of the social issues we have in Dubbo, and there's certainly some pockets of social issues. But when we look at the cold hard stats, there was an 18.5% reduction in crime stats over the last 12 months. Unfortunately, sometimes what we read in the paper are some small pockets, and those pockets have got to be addressed. Again, these aren't things that council can directly control, but we have an influencing role with the state government to try and work out ways that we can address some of those social issues. And we work hand in hand with those to address those social issues. The stats say that we're doing a good job there, but we don't want to read on the front page any time about any of those sort of social issues popping up. Because so many positive things about Dubbo, so many things that we'd like to read on the front page about, much more so than some of those stories that we might see on the front page. So that's a challenge for council, things that we can't directly control, but the community has told us that they very much want to have improved in our community. So they're the headline stats, they're the figures from our first State of the City report. I appreciate everyone's time coming along. Again, just the number of people in this room that came along to hear our State of the City report, even that shows the community engagement and the pride that we've got in our city. So I thank you all for coming along.